No, I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
All right, ma'am, that is amazing. Okay, so let's begin. So my first question to you is, what is your background? What have you done in your, say, 11th and 12th grade and your graduation and further studies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was quite interested in biology from the very beginning. So I ended up doing physics, chemistry, math, biology in class 11 and 12 with the hope that I'll continue doing something in biology. So that was the intention. So that's how I ended up picking up PCMB for my grade 11 and 12.
Okay, all right, that's amazing. All right, so what did you, so we know that you've done MSc and a BE in computer science and after that biological sciences from BITS-Pilani. So how was your experience in BITS-Pilani and what did you enjoy the most when you were pursuing your degree there?
Yeah, so to quickly clarify, I actually did a BE Computer Science and MSc Biological Science degree at the same time. So it was something called a dual degree. So BITS gives you that option. In fact, I ended up choosing to do an integrated master's course just after I finished class 12. So I told you I was very interested in biology, and so I ended up opting to do an MSc integrated course in biological sciences at BITS-Pilani, Goa campus, that too. So I was the first batch at BITS Goa, in fact. So this was supposed to be a 4-year course of biological sciences, of course. But in BITS, you have this unique option to take an additional engineering degree in your second year. I mean, your third year, second year. I forget now what it is. But yeah, essentially at the end of your first year, I think. Yeah. So you because the first 2 years are common courses in BITS, everybody, even if you do biology or computer science or whatever it is, you have common courses in the first 2 years. So what they do is to give you the option to take an additional degree of engineering. If you have a master's in some science related field, you could do an engineering degree as well. And so I did pretty okay in the first couple of years, not great, but okay. And so I was thinking about whether I actually wanted to do take on an additional degree. So what this would mean is instead of a 4-year integrated master's course, I would have to do a 5-year course, but get 2 degrees at the end of it, which seemed like a good deal at the time. But I was not quite sure what engineering degree to take up. I had thought I was not going to do any engineering, but thankfully I'd taken math, of course, in class 12. But I wasn't quite sure which engineering degree to take. And to be very honest, I was asking my friends what was going to be the easiest for me to do as an engineering degree. And it was computer science. And I ended up picking up computer science as a result. But it has actually proven to be quite useful that I, in fact, ended up doing this in my current research as well. But life at BITS was very, very nice. I think we did have a very open atmosphere to learning. There weren't compulsory classes. You didn't have compulsory attendance. A lot of our tests were open book. So that was something I really valued. I made great friends, of course, during my time at BITS. Having said that, though, I think there is quite a way to go in several campuses across the country, including BITS, to making sure that, especially engineering colleges, I'd say, that to making sure that women students feel welcome and are appreciated. And I hope it happens soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so studying something as different as, say, biological sciences and computer science, so how was your experience? Was it too diverse for you to handle both, or was manageable?
Yeah, so the way this worked was, like I mentioned, the first couple of years we had common courses. So we took everything that everybody else was taking. We had engineering principles, we had math, physics, chemistry, biology. All of this was common for everybody. It was in the second year that you started to take electives specific to your degree. So in my third year, I ended up doing all the courses that I was doing was biology. So two semesters of completely biology related courses. And in the fourth year, I did completely computer science related courses. And then in the fifth year, it was 2 independent 6-month projects, one at National Center for Biological Sciences in India, in Bangalore in India. And the second one was at Microsoft Research India, which is also in Bangalore. So I felt like the structure of this course was quite manageable. So it wasn't hard to do this. And because they had these set, and this has been going on for many, many years at BITS, right? So there was a great organization framework that had been put in place already for people to be able to do this. So I didn't find it challenging, but of course, in my fourth year, the friends that I'd made in the first year, of course, had to leave campus. So that was, of course, hard. But we had other people who were doing the same kind of dual degree, and so we had each other. Yeah.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so how did you decide that after doing this dual degree, you wanted to get into biophysics?
Yeah. So although in my CV it looks like I did one thing after the other, and it was all very clear, and it wasn't that way. So I, like I mentioned early on, I was quite interested in biology, and I had the opportunity to work in several labs across the country, primarily in Bangalore, I'd say. So in BITS, like I mentioned, we have the option of doing projects at the final year. In fact, it's required that we do projects in the final year. It's called something called practice school. And even before the final year, I actually had the opportunity to work at the Indian Institute of Science, where I am currently. I was a summer student here in 2007. And I spent a couple of months doing actual research, which was something I had very little exposure to at BITS. I'd learned the techniques involved, but actual science was something I hadn't done previously. And these 2 months at IISc actually opened my eyes to what was possible. What I did in IISc was completely different from, of course, what I'm doing now during my summer internship that I did at IISc that time. But it did show me how science works, how you go about trying to understand what the question you're asking is, how to plan to do experiments to test that hypothesis that you've formed, and so on. So that was actually quite exciting for me. I was very happy that I was able to do that. And then, of course, in my final year, the first semester I spent at National Center for Biological Sciences. I worked with Professor Veronica Rodriguez, and she was an amazing mentor. I think she was one of the people that actually ended, although she probably didn't realize it at the time, she was one of my role models, and I think she inspired me to continue doing research. So I spent the first 6 months at NCBS in Bangalore, worked on a neuroscience related project. So the first project I was telling you about was something related to plants. I did molecular biology primarily. The second was neuroscience related. And the third one I did was at Microsoft Research in India, in Bangalore in India. And there I did something quite different. I tried to bring in both my biology and computer science training. And so I developed a programming language for writing biology protocols so that machines could understand it, and if you want to automate protocols, and also to make it clearer for people who are carrying out experiments. So that was a project I did at Microsoft Research. During the final semester, of course, I was looking to apply for PhD positions elsewhere in the world. I wanted to do something related to biology. So I had applied for a bunch of places in the US for a PhD program. But of course, this happened to be 2008 end and 2009 beginning, which was when the economy got really, really badly hit. And so what ended up happening that year was a lot of people were turning to, so even people within the US, Americans themselves, had taken the choice to go to grad school, to go to do a PhD or a master's, because the economy was very bad. And so that meant that people from outside of the US were also struggling to get into positions in the US, of course, right? So I got a couple of offers. One of them was very good, but they wanted me to fund my own, fund my complete stay at the US. And so that was not an option for me at the time. So what I ended up doing was, because my project in Microsoft Research was in India was also going really well, I took I stayed in Microsoft Research for an additional year to finish up that work. We got it published. And I had gotten quite jilted by the whole experience of having applied to the US. So I didn't apply to the US anymore. I ended up applying to a bunch of places in Europe. I got to know of a few places in Europe from friends who were already there. I applied to a few places, got a calls from a couple of places. So the way that the interview process works with some of these places in Europe is really nice. So for example, the Max Planck Institute, where I ended up doing my PhD, shortlisted students get flown in for a week-long interaction session. So potential students talk to their potential advisors. They get to know from firsthand, face-to-face interactions, what it is that each of them is looking for, how they think they might fit in their lab, and so on. And I thought that experience was really useful. And then at the end of the week-long interaction session, interviews, and so on, you get to know whether you've gotten into the PhD program. And that's how I ended up getting into the PhD program at Dresden, Max Planck Institute in Dresden. Now, as to why I chose to do biophysics, The short answer is I thought it was super interesting. So I don't, as you might have already guessed from the very different kinds of things I did, I was quite interested in science, in specifically biology, but I wasn't picky about being able to do only this or that. And I came across the work of my PhD supervisor, Eva Tolich, when I was interviewing there, and I found it really interesting. And so I thought that would be a great way to continue doing research in biology. And it turned out to be something that was biophysics. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. So, studying at a prestigious university like the Max Planck Institute, how was your experience over there, and what do you think differentiates
Mhm.
it from all the other options that you had that you could go into?
Um, at that time, to be honest, I had this and another option only. I only had a couple of options to choose from. I chose Max Planck Institute, like I said, because I had a couple of friends who'd already gone to the university, to the institute, and specifically also there are a couple of other institutes close to there where you can do a PhD. So they know the place, and they knew exactly what the atmosphere was like, how people work, and so on. And so I had some details already about how this was going to work. And so there was some familiarity with the place already that gave me a little bit of confidence. But the place, when I did end up going there, was amazing. I mean, I had the best time. I think I've made friends for life. I have a mentor for life in my PhD advisor.
Right.
It was a very open, collaborative environment. Nobody was looking to compete against each other. It was more of trying to help each other out, because the common goal was to do good science, right? So I felt that was quite a nice experience. I also learned, I think one of the biggest lessons that I took away from the lab in Dresden, also specifically from Eva, my PhD advisor, was work-life balance, that you can do well and still have time to devote to whatever it is that you want to devote to, right? So that was really an important lesson, I think, that I learned at Dresden as well.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. So, my next question to you is that how do you think STEM will progress in the future years?
Hmm. Specifically in India,
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't
in
have
general.
to be about India.
Yeah,
In general, how will STEM progress?
I think we've come a long way towards making progress in sciences in general, with advent of technology being used in several areas. Specifically, if I could talk about biology, it has um, several fold. It has basically advanced several fold since the time, maybe even 100 years ago, right? So I think there's been a great deal of progress that has been made.
Mhm.
I do hope that the one concern that I have is how much funding we are going to be putting into basic research.
Right.
So essentially how things work is you have a field of research called basic or fundamental research, which is understanding very fundamental biology, for example, like what is DNA, how does it get coiled? These are all fundamental questions.
Right.
While it may not seem like they have immediate application in medicine or other areas of technology, what ends up happening is that this gives you a great framework to work with in the future. As in, let's say there is a disease and you know that it arises because the DNA is not coiled the way it's supposed to be. So if you end up making that connection, you can now go back to basic science and what it has found about coiling of DNA, and perhaps work a way to figure out if there's a therapy that's possible.
Right.
Um, so that is how I would hope the process would work.
Mhm.
But of late, there's been a great deal of talk that's been made about applied research, not just here in India, but elsewhere in the world as well, which is to focus on a specific disease or a specific problem. And unfortunately, what that means is that you're not building a knowledge base that you can go back to in the future. You're going to concentrate on a very specific set of questions, which
Right.
may not be applicable to a larger area of research,
Mhm.
which then puts you in a position where you may not be able to tackle unprecedented emergencies like the COVID situation, right? So, where we are right now in this pandemic and the research that has been made possible because researchers have been looking at coronaviruses for a very long time now.
Mhm.
If they had not been doing that, we would not be able to think of a vaccine in a year and a half since the pandemic started. So it's really important, I think, that we do continue to invest in basic sciences. And that is the only worry I really have about how science has been progressing. I think we've been doing a great deal of progress, but we need to keep making sure that we are investing in basic sciences as well.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Agreed. Okay, so what do you think is the future of biotechnology in India, and what do
Mhm.
you think will it get enough attention that it rightly deserves, and what would be some means that we can do to accomplish that?
Yeah, again, I would say focus on funding basic sciences. Biotechnology, I think it meant something else when it first had its boom, maybe in the early 2000s. I think it meant something different, and now it means something completely different.
Right.
And I think rightly there is an interest in focusing on technology for I think right now, okay, let me clarify what I mean. So, biotechnology, at least as I see it, to a lot of people, seems to imply using technology in biology to alleviate disease
Right.
or any kind of problem related to, let's say, livestock, cattle, whatever it is, right? While that's great and it should be done, like I just mentioned previously, I think it's important to be making sure that you're also investing in the future of basic science
Right.
simply because of the potential that it has.
Absolutely.
And I think so long as that happens, biotechnology will have a great future. I think we tend to be bogged down by labels sometimes. I don't think it's important that we distinguish different areas of biology. So long as it's some kind of science, I think it's great. And if people can work towards achieving that common goal of getting ahead with furthering our understanding of basic processes in life and otherwise, I
Mm-hmm.
think we'll be doing perfectly fine.
All right, that's great. Okay, so how do you think computer science has helped you in what you're currently doing? And would you recommend
Mhm,
it to the younger folks that are trying to pursue a career in biological research?
mhm. Yeah, so like I mentioned, it happened completely by accident that I ended up doing a computer science degree. But I must say, I have found it extremely useful in my current research as well. So, if you take biological research as a whole right now, it wouldn't be possible to carry out this research without having to use tools from very different areas of technology in general, engineering and technology in general. I use image processing very frequently. I mean, our lab runs on being able to process microscopy images that we obtained, right? And for that, my computer science degree has been really invaluable. Again, after analyzing the data, after getting the data, you need to analyze it. And that requires a little bit of coding as well, right? So to figure out, to get the data, to figure out how you get meaningful interpretable data from it. So all of this has been possible because I had some training in the engineering sciences. I don't think it's necessary that it has to be computer science. I think any other field of engineering that if you think you are interested in, you could invest some time in, would benefit you greatly in the future. And this is solely to do with the fact that biology or any other field for that matter is no longer simply that field alone. You have a huge deal of multidisciplinarity in most research right now. So if you are to able to acquire multiple skills while you do your undergraduate or master's degree, I think it will serve you very well, no matter what it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. So my next question to you is that as someone that has studied biology, do you think humans are capable of understanding the vast complexity and diversity of life? And how important do you think it is for us species to understand that?
Yeah, being a scientist, I will have to say I think it is possible. It is, of course, going to be a slow process. I think there's a lot more that we need to understand about our own species, but also about the world around us.
Right.
And that is important because for our future on this planet, I think it is an essential, it is a process that has to be done just so we can survive in this world. It is going to be a process that's going to be slow. We have, like I said, though, made huge progress in the past couple of centuries, ever since we were able to probe cells the way that we can do now.
Right.
We've understood quite a bit about what our body does, what the world around us is about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to come back to, unfortunately, the question of funding basic sciences, because the thing is, for us to be able to do this, we need to fund basic sciences.
Absolutely.
Um, and it is essential for our future as a species, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's great that you're putting that much emphasis on it so that even all of us young people understand the importance of it. So, okay.
Yeah, on that note, actually, if I may interrupt you, I
Absolutely.
think one of the reasons I also want to bring it up is I think it is as younger folks, as I was also like this, it is very, I would say, attractive for us to focus on specific disease. For example, when people end up figuring out how to, or end up figuring out what they want to do in the future, they tend to focus on diseases such as, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so on. While that is how I also did it, I feel now, having had the training that I've had and having done what I have done in the past few years, I think it's more important for you to have a general curiosity about science in general. You may never know where your research will have an application in the future.
Right.
So I'll give you a very simple example. The green fluorescent proteins discovery was made by a Japanese scientist and was used later on by an American scientist. And these two people won the Nobel Prize for it later on. But the person who was actually discovered the green fluorescent protein was working on these marine animals, specifically these jellyfish.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, what he ended up doing was characterizing the protein and being able to clone it, which means you can use it in other organisms as well.
Right.
And so green fluorescent protein, for those of you who don't know yet, is a protein that can be, so it's essentially a fluorescent protein. If you shine light of a specific wavelength, in this case about 480 nanometers, it emits fluorescently at a higher wavelength of about 560 nanometers. And what this helps us do is, because it's a protein, you can now put it onto, or you can essentially attach it to your favorite protein in the cell, and look at that protein's localization and function inside a living cell. And because of this one small tiny discovery of this obscure little protein that was fluorescent inside a jellyfish, which none of us really think about on a daily basis, there have been so many discoveries made in biology that have led to real applications in disease. So I think it's not important that we look at a specific disease when we're thinking about what we want to do in the future, if you're thinking of biology research. Rather, just focus on anything that really excites you. If you find something to be puzzling to you, if you think it's piquing your curiosity, just go after it.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And that does give us some direction as well. All right. So, my next question to you is, over the course of your career as a biophysicist, have you ever worked or seen any projects in your field that you have not agreed with as an individual?
Mhm. Yeah, so this is something I think that is applicable to science in general. So, unlike what some people might think of science, it's not something that is, let's say, how do I say that? It's not the absolute truth at all times. In the
Right.
sense, it's science is a process.
Correct.
You discover some things, people have a hypothesis, they test it, they find that it works in that instance. Other people will find that it doesn't work in other instances, and you build on this common knowledge. And so what you end up having is a set of facts that is agreed upon,
Correct.
right? And this is made possible by the work of a bunch of people. It's not one single person who will be, so let's say I make a discovery and I say this is what it is. Unless other people can test it for themselves and also verify that is the case, I wouldn't call that to be science. So of course, science is going to be a process as a result, and it is basically a set of facts that are established and verified by a bunch of people, right? Scientists working in that field. So it is always possible for us to think of something and say, hey, wait, let us just take a little bit of time and see if this actually works for everybody, or if it's just a one-off thing. Sometimes you do have errors. People are not willfully trying to, in some instances, make false claims.
Right.
They do see some observations. There could be a variety of reasons as to why they see that particular observation in that space in time. So given that is the case, I think science is a process, and it's always possible that there are some things that we don't agree with, but then of course it's up to future scientists and future work to determine whether that's right or wrong. So I don't think I have come across anything specifically that way, but like I said, there's always room. That is the thing. Science is always building upon itself to establish better and better truths about the world that we live in.
Yes, yes, absolutely. All right. So, my next question to you is there any final piece of advice you would like to give to us budding boys and girls in STEM?
Yeah, I think just to also tell you, I've shared my story with you, but do realize that I come from a privileged background. That means I had the opportunity to do all of the things I told you about. I did not have any issues at home, in the sense I had food, water, all of this was available to me. So given this is the case, this is only my story. I don't want to think of you as something that you should be doing. All of the things I did came from the opportunities that I had at that time, that I actually did end up taking them. So given that is the case, I think it is important for people to understand that they will be able to do the best they can with the opportunities that they are that are available to them. If you would like to understand how to, let's say, pick up a field in biology or something, go try and see if you can find a mentor who can help you through the process. It's not easy. Like I said, I had the opportunities, I had the privilege of being able to be in a position where I was able to avail of them. If you
Right.
don't have those, try and reach out to people that you think might be able to help you, right? Because I think it's important to be able to ask for help. Having said that, I also say don't let your current I mean, it is going to be a little difficult for me to say this. If it's possible for you to go after your dreams, do go after them. If you're having something in the way of it, try and see if you can alleviate it by reaching out to somebody, getting their help. And I think there are a lot of people in Indian academia who are in the position to be able to help you. Let's say, for example, if you want to do a summer internship, I think that will be something that could be made possible by writing to people and figuring out if they're interested in taking you on. So I
Absolutely.
think go for what you can, and ask for help when you can't figure out a way to do it yourself.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And reaching out to people is something we always have a doubt with, in the sense whether the person will reply to us, whether they will accept us. But
Yeah.
as someone who reached out to you out of the blue, like we haven't known each other, we just sent you an
Yes.
email, said yes to us. So similarly, you don't have to think already that she or he is going to say no. Just go ahead with an open mind and email whomsoever you want to, and there is a high possibility that he or she might say yes. So just go for it.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay, fine. So that was my last question. Now we'll be
Great.
taking questions from our audience members. So someone has asked, what is helping you more, the engineering degree or the engineering skills?
The skills for sure, because I think doing doing something as different as computer science from biology gave me a different perspective to look at biology as well.
Right.
So the way that you think when you're coding, for example, is, I wouldn't say unlike what you do when you're thinking of how to plan an experiment, but then you have a precise way in which you want to think about coding. In biology, it's harder to do that, but then you try to do that because of the training that you get in engineering, let's say. So I think, so I would definitely say it's the skills that helped and not necessarily the degree.
Absolutely. All right. So Gupteshwara has asked, is there any scope for genomics in India, or will all we're abroad only be the only option?
I think there's always a possibility. It depends on, I think, how important the current political climate thinks it is for us to invest in. Given that our population is so large, I think it is essential that we do something along the lines of what I think the person who asked the question asked.
Right.
But then it again depends on how much funding is going to go into it, who are going to be the stakeholders, what do you want to deliver, and so on. So I think it's essential that we actually do invest in genomics,
Mm-hmm.
but how and when and who's going to be doing that are questions that need to be worked out. I think, especially given the size of our population, it is essential.
Right.
There's a large deal of data that can be obtained, but also a wealth of information that can be used for, let's say, personalized medicine as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. So Divyanshi has asked, can you tell us about your experience at IISc, both as a student and as a professor?
I didn't spend too much time in IISc. I was just a summer intern. I had a good time. I mean, I didn't directly interact with the professor in charge on a daily basis. I was under the mentorship of a graduate student who was working in his lab. And I think I learned how to do science in IISc.
Mhm.
Um, and as a professor, of course, things are quite different. I think having had training elsewhere in the world, I came back with a different set of how things need to be run. Um, there's often this conception that in India, when you are in grad school, that is your life, and there's nothing else to it.
Yes.
And that is something I don't agree with. I don't think that is the thing in your only thing in your life or the most important thing in your life either, because there are other things that are more important, like your health, mental and physical, right? So I think the way that I run my lab right now has essentially been a conglomeration of the lessons I learned not just at IISc,
Mm-hmm.
but elsewhere in the world, specifically about what's important, how do you interact with your colleagues. Colleagues, I mean my students as well as people that work in my lab, right? So I think it's important that we have a good think about what it is that's important when you are doing a PhD. And I say this from the side of being the professor, right? And I think it's important for you to analyze before you get into a PhD program, what is it that's most important for you. Uh, do research about the lab that you're going to end up in. Figure out, talk to the students that are already there, somebody who graduated from there. Ask them what it was like in their lab. Did you work long hours? What was your interaction like with the person that you worked with? I think these are things that are far more important than I'd say than the science in some instances. Because if you're not happy on a day-to-day basis, if you don't look forward to going to the lab, if you're not interested in the project, then none of the other science, so even if you're extremely interested in the science but none of these other things actually are very good, then it doesn't that isn't means nothing then, right? So it's important that I think people do take some time to research the lab, the place that you're going to, how things work and so on.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Vidhi has said, "Good evening, ma'am. Your story was really inspirational. I'm starting
Thank you.
MBBS this November. I wanted to know how to look out for research internships during my time in college. I want to explore more in the field of biology, and I'm highly interested in epigenetics."
Wow. Okay, that's nice. So I would say try and see if you can find labs in. If you're interested in working in India, just I would say go to websites of maybe institutes that you're interested in working in, and see if there's somebody that's working in an area that might interest you, right? So and then again, I would also say if you are in epigenetics, of course, a great area of research, but I wouldn't narrow it down to begin with. Any kind of internship is very very valuable, even if you end up doing epigenetics in the future.
Hmm.
If you learn the process of doing science, it is, I think, the most valuable thing that you can do during an internship. So I would say if you have a person that you think might be a good person to work with, write to them already. uh, do take care while writing the emails, because this is something that I have noticed in some emails that I get.
Mhm.
uh, I get emails that addressed to "Dear Sir, please find CV attached," and that's it. So please don't do that. Just do take the time out to look at the websites of people that you're interested in, find out what they're doing, why that interests you, and write to them a personalized email saying, "This is my background, and I'm very interested in this. And I found that you have done this. I've read your paper, and I found it very interesting. And I was wondering if I could explore aspects like this related to your work." And
Right.
of course, that immediately will get you a response, because, of course, they know that you've taken the time to actually do some research, right? So I think do write to people that you're interested in, but do make it a personalized email. For every person that you write to, you need to spend some time, because otherwise your email is not going to be read or responded to.
Absolutely.
That's the truth, unfortunately.
We send emails, we have a paragraph in our template wherein we write stuff about their work, because you can't just send a blank email like that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is what you had done, right? Which is why I thought, okay, maybe they do know what I'm doing, because sometimes I do get emails where people just write to me without having spent time looking at what I do, and maybe even sometimes write something completely opposite to what I do, and in which case I'm not going to be able to respond even to that, right? So
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So Adnan has asked, in what way is COVID-19 different from SARS and MERS? I mean, structurally and functionally. And why did it spread so much comparatively? I read many opinions but couldn't find much about this.
I'm not the best person, unfortunately, to talk about this, because this is not my area of research. I think there are a lot of people that are working on it, have been working for many years. And I do know it can be overwhelming, because every day there's a new piece of information. So it's going to be quite difficult to sort through them and figure out which is actually relevant to the question that you're asking. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that question. And I don't know if I'd be the best person to even give you that answer, because I haven't really worked on it. And I wouldn't know what the difference is structurally or functionally or otherwise. Sorry.
No, no, that's absolutely okay. Okay, so Santosh has asked, do you think learning computer science has become more of a necessity rather than something we should choose to study?
Depends on what you define as computer science. So when I actually did a computer science course, there's very little programming that I was taught. It was more about data structures and algorithms, theory of computation. So these are things that are not necessarily what people do frequently associated with computer science, right? Typically, when you say somebody doing computer science, you think they're just coding. That's not what I did during my degree. And that's not what usually a computer science course actually takes you through. It's more about all of the theory behind computation in general. And so it depends on what it is that you think computer science means. If it is if it's just being able to, let's say, program in MATLAB, you can take a course independently of a computer science degree to learn how to do MATLAB, right? So it is a necessity for you to be able to analyze the data, and for that you can do R, you can do MATLAB, you can do a host of other things. But that doesn't necessarily require you to do a computer science degree.
Right, right, absolutely. Okay. So RL has asked, how did you manage to uphold your curiosity for research all this time? Like, was there a point wherein you lost the curiosity for it? And if yes, then how did you maintain it?
I think thankfully that is the one thing that I haven't lost. And that's to do with the fact that I was happy also otherwise. So if the curiosity or the pursuit of curiosity, which is PhD, had come at the price of other facets of my life, let's say my mental health or my relationship with my parents or my significant other, that would have then killed it for me. And I have been very lucky in that it hasn't happened to me, in the sense the pursuit of the truth or discovery, for example, hasn't really come at the cost of any of my other parts of my life. That is why I think I'm still able to be curious, to be able to find joy in discovery. And yeah, so that's why I think it's really important how you, where you end up doing a PhD or who you end up doing a PhD with.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay.
Having said that, though, I will say that there are, of course, days when it gets frustrating, when things don't work out. But that is a process that you will go through during any kind of research process, right? You have things that work out, you go back to the drawing board, you figure out what you want to do differently. But then, of course, that's a long-term process. And of course, any process, any kind of work that you're involved in has the same sets of problems, that things may not work, but they didn't go back and troubleshoot and figure out how to get it to work. That's part of any other profession as well. But like I said, it's about not having to let go of other parts of your life in order to just do this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. So Vidhi has again asked how to start doing research. As you said before, in India, schools don't directly expose you to research opportunities. So how do you reach out to professors and decide on a topic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the topic, like I said, is not super important. There are some summer programs that you could, if you're in school, I think the KVPY program has been really good in placing school students with research labs. But if you're in college, for example, in your undergrad, there are the Indian Academy of Science, the JNCSR, Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, and I presume, I don't know of the others, even BSSD, my own department, we had run summer internships, right? So these are specific calls that we have. We have about 10 to 15 projects that are offered in different labs. You apply to these. Of course, it is a competitive process. We have about 400 applications coming in for about 10 positions typically. And so you do have modes by which you don't have to directly approach a professor. You could, in the first go through some of these academies. So the Indian Academy of Science does this. I think the other academies also do it. I'll have to look it up. But independently also, institutes such as ours have department specific summer internship programs that are advertised. So in this instance, you won't have to reach out directly to the professor yourself. You just have to apply to the program, and if you get shortlisted, you get to go do an internship in that specific lab. If this doesn't work out, the idea would be then to write to specific people using the same technique that I mentioned just a little while ago. Just go through their website, make sure that you have a personalized email, and write to them and see if it works.
Right. Okay. All right. So Vidhi has again asked, do you think coding is a necessity? And as you mentioned, your story, it has helped you enormously.
It can be learned. I mean, if it's required for your work, it can be learned. I don't think it's as complicated as most people make it out to be. I think there is, I think for all of us, I don't think it's just Vidhi or any of us, in fact. We have this hesitation to step into something that is unknown. And I think we spend a lot more time in the process by thinking about whether you should do it rather than actually doing it. So if you think coding would be beneficial for you, there are tons of resources that you could refer to actually get started. Let's say if you are thinking about MATLAB, go
Hmm.
online, you'll find a bunch of options where you can find tutorials, you can find courses even. And I think it's about getting started. And I don't know if I think it is good to know. I think it's really good to know because it saves you a bit of time. You could do the same things in Excel, but you can only go so far as what I feel.
Yeah.
It could bring down your productivity simply because you're doing something inefficiently in MATLAB that in Excel that you could do in MATLAB, for example. It
Correct.
doesn't have to be MATLAB. It can be any open source software, Python, R, whatever it is, right? Pick Python. I think you should pick Python because it's open source. You don't have to spend money on it and so on. You can do the same things that you can do in MATLAB. So given that is the case, I think it is possible for any of us to do it. It's just about, I understand also the hesitation. If tomorrow I have to go learn a completely new technique that I haven't ever done in the past, I understand where the hesitation comes from. But I guess you guys are a lot younger than me and are more curious and more interested about everything in the world. So I'm sure it will not be a problem for you.
Absolutely. All right. So Arul has asked, what research journal would you say is the best? Is reading journals good to start? I mean, good from the start of bachelor's degree, or is it a bit too early?
So for the as regards the first part, which is the best journal, I don't think there is. I don't think I have a preference for one journal being the best or the other. Having said that, I do have some preference towards society journals. So there are these societies that have their own journals, such as the American Society for Cell Biology runs the Molecular Biology of the Cell journal. You have the Journal of Biological Chemistry also being run by a society. All of these journals actually do have a fee for their articles being published from, they take the fee from the authors. But then that money also goes back into the society's activities, such as funding people for conference travel, stuff like that. So it goes back to people themselves who are in need of that kind of funding.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, I am more preferential to society journals. But of course, I don't think the journal is as important. What's important is the work that got published. So I don't think there is a specific journal that is better than the other. As regards to the second part, whether you should start reading as early as possible, I would say yes. Although, to be very honest, I didn't read too many papers in my undergrad. I read very few papers. I only started reading them during the first internship that I did in IISc, and then I did a lot more reading in the last in internship I did at NCBS in Bangalore. But having said that, I think it would have been very useful for me to start reading early on. So there is also an art to reading journal articles,
Mm-hmm.
and there are some resources you can find online as to how to do this effectively,
Okay.
right? So, and in fact, I would urge students to start reading the really old papers that made seminal discoveries.
Right.
And that way, what that ends up happening is, so what's happening in science right now is that you have a lot of information in every single article that you see. And some
Correct.
of this can be really overwhelming, right? Because when you start reading, you might come across a term that you don't know, and then you might have to go look that up, and then something else will come up and you go look that up and so on. But this is not going to be a problem in some of the older papers, let's say from the 80s or 70s or so on, where there's a very clear message and there's a very clear understanding of what was done to get to that result. So I would urge you to go back and read the older papers, seminal discovery, where seminal discoveries were made, maybe your favorite discovery.
Yeah.
And you can read about how they did it and what the process was in the discovery, and that way it's also more relatable. So maybe you start reading really old papers first, and then you can move on to newer papers.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so Bharat has asked, how can I get into quantum computing as I'm very much into physics and the fundamentals of computing as a high school student?
Yes, I wouldn't know, unfortunately, but yeah, there are of course actually wouldn't even know if there's a course on quantum computing. I am firstly not informed in this area. I'm afraid I don't have an answer to the question, but there are a lot of people doing quantum computing research. In fact, I even came across an announcement recently for a quantum computing conference at IISc. So there's a lot of research interest in IISc and elsewhere in the country. But as to how you'd go about doing it at the undergrad level is something I'm not sure of right now.
All right.
But then again, like I said, it's not important for you to be very specific in your undergrad. Figure
Absolutely.
out what you're specifically like later on. Be open-minded early on to try out as many things as you can, and then later on you can fix on one thing that you want to do.
Absolutely. In fact, actually, I came across a quantum computing course. Bharat, I can send it to you after the session gets over. All right. So Arushi has asked, what is your favorite discovery? She's just curious.
Uh-huh. I guess I'll be very partial to the kind of work I do right now. So the stuff that I work on, some of which I work on, I would say, deals with these tiny machines inside living cells called molecular motors, motor proteins, so they're called. So these are proteins that break down the energy from ATP, the energy currency of the cell, and convert it to actual movement. And by doing this movement, they literally walk on these road-like structures inside cells and bring about movement of whatever is inside a cell. One thing needs to go to another place inside our cells, right? So this movement is brought about by these motor proteins, and also during cell division, when one cell splits into two, the nuclear material has to be also divided, right? So these motor proteins are also required to pull apart the nuclear material. So I think that would be my favorite discovery. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. So, um, yeah, Divyanshi has asked, how did you come about being a professor and was it your original plan?
I would say no. That's a great question. I didn't know what I wanted to do, to be very honest. So even after I finished my PhD, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to remain in academia, if I wanted to go to industry. I knew I wanted to be in a science related job, but I didn't quite know if I wanted to be uh, a researcher in a university. I think what really helped me was conversations with my mentors, not just my PhD mentor, but also I have other couple of mentors who advised me during my time at Reston. And I think when you're too close to something, you don't see the big picture. The mentors help you do that. So, for example, in my instance, they thought I would do very well in academia, which is
Right,
why I thought, okay, people have faith in me and they think I can do it. I didn't know if I could do it myself,
right.
but they seem to know and think that I would do well, which is why I ended up trying to do what I did. And thankfully, it's worked out. I think that's why I think I will harp upon the importance of mentors again, saying that you try and identify people that can be completely honest with you, are going to be critical, give you advice, and they don't judge you for if you don't take the advice or if you do. Yeah.
Absolutely. Along with that, also keeping an open mind, as you've said multiple times, not
Yeah.
very soon what you want to become or what you want to do, just keeping an open mind.
Hmm.
Exploring. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so someone has asked, how well do you think is biophysics advertised in India?
Yeah, I would say there's a different notion of the kind of biophysics I do is very different from what you might have heard of. For example, in most instances, you think of structure, right? You think of looking at X-ray crystallography, finding out structures of proteins and so on. And that is one area of biophysics, of course. The other is what I do, which is looking at how stuff moves inside a cell, what brings about positioning, and this is another complete different area of biophysics. And the latter, which is what I do, has found some traction in recent years, but I don't think it's as big as it could be.
Right.
And so I think that's why I think it's important that maybe I think it's I don't think the onus is on the students to find this out. I think the onus is on us, people like me, to actually advertise this kind of research is also going on. Yeah, you're right. It's not very popular, but I think it's because we haven't done a good job of advertising it.
Okay, all right. So Amika has asked, do you think research resource and exposure in our country is limited? I personally think in India, people have generalized biology as medicine.
You're right. I think that is a completely fair assessment of how things are right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that that scientists communicate to the public as to what they're doing, and I think that's a responsibility all of us scientists have to communicate the importance of our research, what our research has found, and the importance of that research to the public, because we are, after all, using public money to carry out most of our research.
Right.
And I think it's uh, it's um, uh, it's a shortcoming on our side, I would say, on scientist side,
Mhm.
for not having a good enough job.
Okay, all right. So someone has asked, how can one bag a PhD in a good institute abroad? Is there any method of application that will increase our chances of getting selected? What habits or activities can we include at our bachelor's or master's level that will be fruitful?
Yeah, I think, uh, like I mentioned, the internships will really help, especially if you want to do research in the future during your PhD. Then you'd have to, I think, have shown that you have carried out research at several instances during the course of your master's and maybe undergrad even.
Right.
I understand it can be difficult also to do this. Not everybody can have research experience. And I do think people elsewhere in the world also look at your ability to think and your ability to come up with solutions to research problems in addition to just your research abilities. So I think it's all right if you don't have the opportunities to be able to do the projects, but it will really help if you can, even
Right.
if you have one single piece of sorry, one single exposure, one single instance where you get exposed to research. Yeah. um, and I think additionally, if you, I don't know if the goal should be to get a good PhD from a good university. I think if you do think you're generally interested, the motivation of course has to be that you're generally interested, and if that is the case, you already would be doing things that lead to you being in a place that is good enough for any university anywhere in the world. So just nurture your passion
Mhm.
during your undergrad times and your master's times, and that automatically, I think, will help you get into programs.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. So someone has asked, what according to you are the top five research universities all across the globe?
I think that's a very difficult thing for me to say. I don't think I have an answer. I'm sure there are lots of ranking lists that are available. Please do pick one, and this is all very subjective, as of course, as well, right? In the sense, it depends on what criteria they took into account, what they gave more weightage to, and so on. And it may not be the same as what I would give weightage to, but I don't have enough of an expertise to be able to look at all the universities and say this. So I don't have a response to that.
All right, okay. So someone has asked, motor protein is a very intriguing topic for research. I read that motor proteins operate in stochastic non-equilibrium isothermal systems. So what would be their functions in equilibrium isothermal states, or equilibrium isobaric system, or equilibrium
All right. So motor proteins happen inside. Yeah. So motor proteins, I mean, yeah. So they are super complicated and they are super interesting. In living cells, you actually will rarely reach. You won't technically reach equilibrium. You reach a steady state,
Mhm.
and that's because there's constant input and output from the system. And their function inside living cells is something we have characterized quite a bit. There's a long way to go in understanding how they get regulated inside living cells, but it is a great topic. And if it interests you, please do look up literature. There's a lot of resources on YouTube as well on motor proteins. So do look it up. And if you have any questions, write to me. I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, great. Okay, so Mrinalini has asked, how exactly can we come about getting into research under biology, and what fields will have scope in India in the future?
Whatever I have told you so far, essentially just go about looking at how you can expose yourself to more research opportunities. And again, like I mentioned previously, I think it's not so important what field it is. So
Mm.
long as you're interested in a research question, go do that. And later on, you can figure out I mean, if you think that doesn't work for you, you can always move to a different field. Moving within fields in biology is not complicated. If you
Right.
want to go from, especially at higher levels, at a level where you're looking at undergrad, for example, it's not even important that you do biology. They do take biology as an undergrad course. You can always come back to it later on. You can do maybe an elective course, and you can take up additional courses to pick up biology. So I don't think it's important to figure out exactly what you want to do before you start the course. Figure it out during the course of the study.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so another question someone else has asked is that have you ever faced any struggles or obstacles or challenges as a colored woman in research or just as a woman in?
Mhm. Yeah, so in Dresden, I did not have any issues whatsoever because of the inclusive atmosphere that they had set up in Dresden at the Max Planck Institute in Dresden. In fact, if you look at the lab that Eva was running, the constitution of the lab, she was Croatian. She is Croatian. We had a couple of Germans, but we had Portuguese people, we had Italians, we had Romanians, Ukrainian, uh, Indian, of course.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think if I've left out any nationality. But yeah, so it was a very very international atmosphere, and I never felt any specific. In fact, I never felt anything adverse at all during my PhD. So I've been very very fortunate. Having said that, though, I do think after having come back to India and started my lab, I'm very conscious of the implicit biases that women face. There are, of course, explicit biases and very serious things such as sexual harassment that happens. But apart from that, on a day-to-day basis, I have also been the subject of implicit biases. And this is something that can be very damaging for the future of women in science in India. And to combat this in a very very small way, what I did was to actually team up with a person called Shruti Murlidhar from the MIT in the US. She's a postdoctoral researcher there. She and I teamed up to found something called Bias Watch India. And what we do as a part of Bias Watch India is to document and call out gender biased panels at Indian scientific conferences. And we do this on Twitter. We have a website as well. And we have been also getting information on what the actual numbers of women in science in India are, because the statistics are outdated. The ones that we have now are outdated. And it's not clear exactly what's happening, but based on a very preliminary analysis of about 40 institutes across the country, these are all top institutes, you'd be sad to find out that the total percentage of women in science in India is about 10.6, which is still extremely low.
very less. Yeah.
Even in a field like biology, where at the graduate level, in the PhD student pool, you'll see that about 50% of the students are female in biology, are women students, right? But even in a field like biology, the proportion of women professors in biology is only about 23%. So there is a huge problem that exists, and I think some of those have to do with the fact that there is, of course, a bias during the time of hiring people at the time during interviews.
Yes.
Also, when they come into the institute, there are very many implicit biases against women, and this is really damaging to the careers of these women. This is only I'm talking only about the point of view of the institute and the working environment. Of course, the social angle is something that is completely different, and it is going to require a lot of collective action by the society for us to make sure that women feel welcome at the workspace, whether it is academia or elsewhere in the workspace.
No, it's amazing that you've started that organization wherein you call out people, because somehow that is probably the only way something like this can be stopped or can be controlled at a level.
Mhm. Yeah, it's been a challenge. Of course, some of it is met with some kind of let's say, people don't like it when you call out stuff, right? So it's not easy, but we've been trying to do is we've found a lot of support though also, which is very heartening, because we do see that there are male and female allies who are actually amplifying our voices, which is good to see. So I'm hoping that we do have a small effect in this, if at all.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. All right, so I think those are all the questions. It was an absolute pleasure having you on our forum, ma'am. Thank you so much for doing this, and
Thank you.
thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks, Himanshi. This has been a really nice experience. I do hope I see a lot of the audience and in the future in STEM in India. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye bye. Have a nice day.
Bye. You too. Bye bye.